This is Village in Motion. My name is Kamaljit, and I know many of you. I'm a physician at the medical center. I'm here today, and we're going to talk about hearing loss with someone whom I consider to be an expert. She may decline that particular representation, but we have Marie Lee here. And Marie told me that it's okay to say that she has adult onset hearing loss and has bilateral cochlear implants. And so Marie, I know that you've done shows previously on hearing loss, but it is such a common problem at the medical center that it would be good to be able to share this information with all of our residents.
Yes, it's very important because hearing loss is so prevalent, especially at Green Spring, based on the age of our residents. So I find almost every day I see people who could use some assistance with their hearing or have done something about their hearing.
Right. And you know, the numbers are staggering. We have 38 million people in the United States who have hearing loss, and less than 20% of them actually have a hearing device. And so if we think about it in terms of improvements, there's a great deal that can be done for those with hearing loss. And so, you know, aging is something that's really important, and that's one of the reasons why there's such a high prevalence of hearing loss in the Green Spring community and other communities like this. And you can speak more to this, Marie, but between the ages of 65 and 75, 1 out of 3 individuals have some hearing impairment. And if you go above age 75, those numbers go up, and it's 1 out of 2 individuals. So it's a very high number. Did you want to add to that?
Well, I agree with you. And of course, as we get to the average age of most of the residents at Green Spring, the average age is about 85. Mm-hmm. So at 75, if it's 1 out of 2, we know that it's increased at 85. And of course, I think an important number here at Green Spring is how many people have done something about their hearing loss.
Right.
My research shows that it takes sometimes 7 years for someone to realize that I may have a hearing loss, or people are telling me I have a hearing loss, but it takes them 7 years before they accept it and do something about it.
Right.
That's a problem.
That is a problem. So as we start this conversation about hearing loss, it's important to remember that we have 3 kinds of hearing loss. This is very simply related to the anatomy of the ear. So the ear has 3 parts. The outer ear, that's the part that, you know, sometimes people take a Q-tip. We don't recommend it, but take a Q-tip and clean it. That's the part of the ear when you go to see the doctor that we can actually see quite easily when we use that little device to put in your ear and take a look. And the eardrum that we see separates the outer ear from the middle ear, and then beyond that is the inner ear. So the first type of hearing loss that can occur is what is called conductive hearing loss, and that includes the outer ear and the middle ear. And an example of this, for instance, is not to be confused with long-term hearing loss, is when someone has wax that is impacted in the ear, it can affect hearing. And the beauty of it is that once you find it and you remove the wax, the hearing can improve. But that may not be the only problem. So conductive loss is the outer ear and the middle ear. The very important hearing loss that occurs as we get older is the inner ear. And the inner ear is what contains the cochlea and then has the connection with the auditory nerve, the hearing nerve, which goes to the brain, which is actually how we hear. We sort of think that hearing is just sitting right here, but actually it's not. It's much more complex than that. So the sensory neural is the one that we get as we get older. So it's a function of aging, and it's also a function of loud noises. So those rock concerts that you went to or wished you had gone to and just listened on your radio, those loud noises with aging contribute to the sensory neural. And then the third type is one where you can have features of both. And so we need to be mindful that we know what we're dealing with and what's the best way to provide assistance. And so we're going to talk more about that as we go along, right? Okay, so at this juncture, let me ask you, when you think you have hearing loss, what should you do?
Well, what a lot of people do is ask their friends.
Right.
So do you think I have any hearing loss? So if I were your best friend, I probably would say, oh no, you don't really have any hearing loss. Sometimes you don't hear me.
Right.
But that's not what you should do. What you should do is get your hearing tested. That's probably the most important thing. Greenspring does offer some hearing screenings. These will tell you if you might benefit from a hearing device like a hearing aid, or some other way to assist or increase the volume of sound that you're hearing. But truly, even after you have a hearing screening, if you find that you do have a hearing loss, you still will need a hearing test, because the hearing test is the only way that you can see what part of the sound waves am I not hearing. Am I not hearing the high sounds? Am I not hearing the middle sounds, which are conversation sounds? Am I not hearing the low sounds? And also, at what volume do I need before I hear these sounds? So I've found that most of the age-related hearing loss that I encounter, the people have trouble with the high sounds first. So it's the birds, it's whispers. So when somebody whispers in your ear and you really can't hear a word they're saying and you just bluff your way through it, you know it's time for a hearing test.
Yes.
If you're walking outdoors and all of a sudden you realize, which takes a while, that the birds aren't singing, it's not that the birds aren't there, it's that you're not hearing them anymore, because that's a very high sound.
So is this a good time for us to show the slide?
Oh yes, I think that's a great time to show the slide. Okay. We have a slide of an audiogram. And the audiogram shows the different levels of hearing loss from the top to the bottom. So we have normal hearing and moderate loss in the yellow part, and then down below that, it's kind of a tan orangish color, is severe hearing loss, and then profound hearing loss. So if you go from top to bottom, that is the volume. So you have very little volume at the top, like leaves rustling or birds singing, and at the bottom, if you can hear trucks or rock music or a chainsaw. Of course, those are very loud sounds, and probably the last that someone with a hearing loss is going to lose. And then from left to right is, of course, what we call the pitch or the frequency. So as the pitch gets higher, they're more likely to lose those sounds. So many people start with losing the high sounds first. So as I said, it's the birds. And when it comes to the English language, it's the letters like F, S, and TH, th, those sounds. Those are the first ones that you will miss. And they're crucial sounds because they are within what we call that speech banana, which is across the spectrum of hearing sounds. And when you lose those F, S, and TH sounds, those are some of the connective consonants in our language. And so you don't hear the end of one word nor the beginning of another. And that is why many people say, I can hear fine, but everybody is mumbling. but they're not mumbling.
Right, right. And
You're not
so
hearing
this
it.
this is an excellent slide, and
It is.
the upper right-hand corner are the birds. And in addition to beholding the beauty of the birds, the beauty of their song can be lost very early, and that is a great loss.
It is.
Now, many folks here have pets. I don't know about cats, but I do know that they have dogs because I see them walking their dogs. And if you look at the lower left-hand side, you'll see that the dogs barking do show up. So you'll still be able to hear your pet bark, but you know, you'll not be able to hear the birds sing.
No, and of course, one other important thing that you may not hear is the smoke alarm.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes the pitch of that is in one of the higher frequencies.
Right.
Of course, it is very loud, so you may be able to hear it just because of the loudness of it.
Right.
However, if you're in a sound sleep, will you hear it? That's
Right.
a big question for me. I think older people sleep rather soundly. Some are using sleep aids or some medication to help them sleep. And will they sleep right through a sound alarm?
Right.
That concerns me greatly.
Of course, and I think this is a good segue for us to talk about hearing loss, not as being an isolated problem. We tend to think, you know, we're having trouble with our eyes, so we should go see the eye doctor. We're having trouble with our hearing, so we should see a hearing specialist. But hearing is something that involves many other neurocognitive functions. So specifically, hearing has an effect in terms of depression and dementia. Over a 10-year period, there's more than a 50% greater risk of dementia, or greater than 40% risk of depression, and a 30% or greater risk of falls. So if we just look at the first two, just to dwell on them a little bit, we know that first taking dementia, because that's the highest risk, we have many reasons for dementia. And we can't mostly isolate it completely and say, this is the cause or this is not the cause. And so if we recognize that our hearing has a bearing on the development of dementia, perhaps we'll be more keen to get our hearing checked. And getting hearing checked is no different than getting our eyes checked. We have no qualms about getting our eyes checked, and we talk about our failing vision and our concern about it and the isolation. But you know what? Hearing is doing the same thing. And so when the residents come to see the doctors and providers at the medical center, you know, they're having difficulty. And the question is, why are they having difficulty with what is being discussed? And at least part of that is even just the hearing loss per se. And then assimilating that information and recognizing that it has an impact on something beyond just the narrow focus, oh, I can't hear well. It doesn't have anything to do with anything, except that it does. And so dementia is a very big problem for us here. The problem we have with dementia overall, and I'm being a little bit tangential, but I think it's important, we are always trying to treat dementia once it's developed. But if we know that this is a risk, and we look at risk stratification, then we should consider that hearing loss may be moving us in that direction. And so we should be even more attentive to hearing loss than we've been before. The second one is depression. Again, depression has a very high incidence. It's recurrent. It can be moderate or severe. Many folks take medications for depression. And so the reason hearing loss is associated with depression is, you know, very easy to understand. There's a degree of isolation that's occurring. Oftentimes with hearing loss, one of the things there's more difficulty with is listening to phone conversations. So if you can't hear well on the phone, then you want to meet people in person, and then if you don't hear them well, then you try to avoid that social contact. And so it's sort of self-imposed isolation. Others can hear you. You may be actually speaking louder because that's how you are hearing the sounds. So what is hearing loss is now really catapulting you into something else that you want to try and avoid. And so any problem, new problem you have means more medication. More medications are not better for you. Anything we can do to prevent that is good. And then falls. I mean, we've spoken about falls before, and we'll probably do a special program on falls at some point. All comers, all things being equal, 1 out of 3 individuals above the age of 65 fall every day. Now, if with hearing loss there is a 30% greater risk of falls, then an individual may fall because they trip, or they fall because they don't hear something that's happening. And so falls are a very serious problem because you've got injuries, you've got visits to the emergency room, perhaps hospitalization, perhaps fractures, and then falls have their own continuum of medical problems that may ensue, including heart attacks and strokes.
Yes.
So, hearing is not an isolated problem, and I thought that was important for us to emphasize that today, because when folks here, the residents, are thinking of hearing loss, I know you have some 300 people who are part of your group, and probably many more should be part of your group. But the answer to all of that is not just Marie Lee, but what you are talking about today, which is let's do something about it. Right? And so why don't you tell us, Marie, what should folks do when they want to get their hearing checked? Should they go for a screening? It seems to me, and correct me if you think we should do otherwise, I didn't find an official guideline around this, but I think that just like you get an eye exam, folks above the age of 75, and especially as we get older, should consider a screening test for hearing, even if you think your hearing is A+. Because everything is relative. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, just to make a step forward, if it's a hearing screening, that's fine.
Yes.
Hearing tests are covered by Medicare. And so the hearing test will give you a more definitive answer and will show you whether you have a severe hearing loss or just a mild hearing loss. So with a mild hearing loss, you may be able to get by with an assistive listening device, and you wouldn't need to have a hearing aid.
Right.
But once you know what your hearing loss is, then you can deal with it.
Right.
We have all kinds of resources here. We have an audiologist who comes every Friday by appointment. Even after you get a hearing aid, you will need to go back for adjustments.
Yes.
So there are some hearing aid providers who might not cost as much as those you would buy from an audiologist, but you need to keep in mind, how will I get there?
Right.
Also, some of those providers have proprietary software within their hearing aids, which does not allow anyone else to tinker with that hearing aid. So that you have to take it back to the place where you purchased it.
I see.
And that's not always convenient.
Correct.
I have met 1 or 2 residents who were visiting a child, and the child convinced them, let's go to the audiologist and get a test. They got the test, they bought the hearing aid out in Kansas, and they came back to Green Spring, and they need an adjustment because your hearing is not going to stay the same from the age of 75 to 85. Most likely it's going to get worse.
Right.
Just like your eyesight sometimes changes too. So I think the best place to start is with a hearing test with an audiologist. That doesn't mean you're signing up to buy anything.
Right.
You're just getting the hearing test.
And so this is the hearing test that you're speaking of, is the one that you get in a soundproof booth.
Yes.
Is that not right?
It doesn't hurt at all.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, you put a headphone on just like this, this type of a headphone. You put a headphone on, and you listen to some beeps. And most people have had those hearing tests when they were in elementary school.
Right.
And so it's the same kind of test. But the audiologist knows how to adjust the testing to determine whether the sound is too loud or too soft,
right,
or what sounds you're not hearing. So.
Right, right. So I believe we're on the verge of something very exciting that's going to happen.
Oh.
And
it depends where you sit on that.
Yes. So there's going to be legislation that is going to allow over-the-counter hearing aids. So now just imagine, just like you go to a drugstore and you pick up glasses and you keep trying them until you find the right one, and you pick it up and you go home. So tell us about the legislation and how will that work with the hearing devices?
Well, first of all, I think we need to understand that anyone who has a hearing loss probably does not have a hearing loss that is like anyone else's. And so it's not as easy as buying reader glasses. Mm-hmm. And by putting on a hearing aid, it doesn't mean that your ear is now fixed.
Right.
Because your brain has forgotten many sounds that you've not heard in, let's say, 7 years, if you've waited 7 years. So you have to retrain your brain what those sounds are.
Right.
So when you first wear a hearing device, you're going to hear all different kinds of sounds that you've forgotten you could hear before.
Yes.
And you have to teach your brain what those sounds are, and teach your brain also that that isn't a sound that I want to hear right now. I would like to hear her voice, but I don't want to hear that music in the background. And you can teach your brain not to listen to the background, but rather to listen to the voice in front of you.
Right.
So, but this legislation actually stemmed from a study that was done by the National Academies of Sciences in 2016. And that study is available online if anyone just searches for National Academies Hearing Study. It is the first thing that comes up in your search. And you can read a short version, a long version, the recommendations, whatever you care to read. But essentially, out of that legislation, Congress passed the Over-the-Counter Hearing Aid Act of 2017. And what that will do is by next year, by 2020, it will allow people to buy hearing aids over the counter, but not from Dollar Tree or not from Walmart. They must be FDA approved manufacturers of these hearing aids. But there will still be barriers to hearing care services, because many people are handed a hearing. If I handed people a hearing aid out in the hallway and said, "Here, I'm giving out free hearing aids," most people wouldn't know what to do with them.
Right.
They wouldn't know how to change the batteries. They wouldn't know how to put it in their ear correctly, and so on. So there's still going to be those barriers to hearing
Yes.
with the over-the-counter hearing aids. There is some thought that by having them available for people who have mild to moderate hearing loss, that might bring the cost of hearing aids down some. Right. Once they're available. But how do you know you have mild to moderate hearing loss?
Right.
If you've never had a hearing test? You
Correct.
wouldn't know that.
That's right.
And also, one person's mild hearing loss might not be the same as another person's mild hearing loss. So I think the barriers are still there.
Right.
To buying an over-the-counter hearing aid. I just don't think that it's the way to go.
Right.
My preference would be for Medicare to cover hearing care services.
Yes.
I think that would benefit older people if they knew that some portion of their hearing care could be covered by Medicare. There might be more people who don't wait that 7 years, that they might take the advice of their family and have a hearing test. Right. And get a device sooner.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. So because of the cost of the hearing aids, everybody's looking for something less expensive, totally understandable, but what you may get may not be what you need. And so you first need to identify what you need.
Exactly.
So while it's good, it might still be very problematic, as you say. So in the remaining 5 minutes, let's talk about a couple of other things, if we could.
All right.
So let's talk about assist devices.
Okay. Well, I have a few of my assistive listening devices in front of me.
Yes.
First of all, the assistive device that I use is a cochlear implant. This is a surgical procedure for people who have a severe, profound hearing loss. That means they pretty much cannot hear anything except a jet engine. And that's a surgical procedure, and that can also be done for people who have a conductive hearing loss. So that's the most important assistive listening device.
Right.
Some other assistive listening devices that are helpful for people our age, this is a pocket talker. And this is a device that costs about $100, and you can wear earbuds or a headpiece like this. Some of them have this is the microphone, and you can put it on a long cord, and you can put the microphone up in front of a speaker and go 25 feet back and sit in your seat, put your headphones on, and be able to hear through the microphone.
I have some residents who bring those with them.
Yes, and there is one available in the medical center.
Right.
So all you have to do is ask for it. Just say, I don't hear very well, I'm going to visit with the doctor, and I'd like to use the pocket talker.
Right.
So we have, fortunately, Greenspring put in the hearing loop system in the theater, the Akatink room, and soon to be the chapel. And to listen to the hearing loop through the hearing loop system, a person needs a hearing aid with an active T-coil or telecoil, and that your audiologist can put in your hearing aid.
Good.
But if you don't have a T-coil, you can borrow a hearing loop receiver from the theater or the Akatink room or the chapel. Just ask the group leader. And again, this is a matter of turning it on, putting the lanyard around your neck so it stays in a vertical position, and then putting the headpiece on. And you will hear the sound that comes through a microphone without any background noise. It's a great device. The T-coil is accessed and does the same thing.
So in the interest of time, can I ask you to talk about the smartphone? And
oh, yes. Well, some of the new, more advanced hearing aids are now connecting to a smartphone. And you can get an app on your smartphone and use it as a microphone. So you can put your cell phone in the center of the table, and wirelessly it will pick up the sound and send it to your hearing aid. And there are all other kinds of ways that you can use your smartphone. Even a hearing test. Not an audiology hearing test, but you can even test your own hearing using some apps on a smartphone. So this is the wave of the future. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to have to buy a smartphone.
I know. So I have a disclaimer. I have an iPhone here too. And for those that I see, I always say, if I don't have it with me, excuse me, I have to go and get my assistant. Little did I know that this can do so much more for me now. And I do own Apple stock.
That's good. And of course, my Ericsson is coming to Greenspring very soon. And my Ericsson works not just with a smartphone, but also with an iPad. So that will be a big advantage. But those who have hearing loss can also use it. You can turn on the closed captions on your TV. I mean, you can buy a caption phone. You can get a shake awakes if you can't hear the alarm. There are all kinds of assistive devices.
Wonderful.
If you're interested, just come to one of my meetings and I'll help with that.
So in the last minute or so that we have left, I think I want to talk about how much you've done to improve problems with hearing and the awareness in the community. And I want to thank you for that. But I want for you to speak about the lip reading that you've started, and you've got 30 seconds.
Oh my, okay. Well, I appreciate your kind words, and I wish I could measure up to the accolades. But I taught one lip reading class in January for 8 weeks, and I had a limit of 15 people. They were very pleased with the results, And I will do another lip reading class. We use this book. The only cost is buying the book, and that's not from me, it's from another author. So we used the book and a mirror so we could see ourselves in the mirror. So
I see.
that's
Very
upcoming.
interesting. I wondered why you had brought the mirror along today. And then I think that we can probably close by saying that if you are coming to see the doctor about any issues, particularly hearing issues, please do wear hearing aids if you wear them. And I know you want to add something to that.
Make sure the batteries are fresh in the hearing aids.
That's right, because that will certainly make our communication much better.
Yes,
right?
It will.
Okay. All right. Well, so I think what we've been able to do today is hopefully increase awareness for getting a hearing test, and that we should treat our hearing with the same respect with which we treat our eyes. We wouldn't want to leave our glasses at home, so we don't want to leave our hearing aids at home, because that not only makes it difficult for us to hear as an isolated problem, but has a great bearing on depression, dementia, fall risk, and in general, your overall health. So we hope that you listen to this carefully and will attend one of Marie Lee's sessions in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today.